Hello! I've been wanting to talk about books on my channel for a while. I just didn't really know how to do it with just sitting here staring at the camera, so I decided to do my makeup at the same time. So this is rating every book that I read this month. I just want to be a booktube girl. I want to be hip with the nerds. I'm having this weird back pain. I don't know if it's from sleeping wrong or from my job where I'm always like that. Let's get into it. I read 8 books this month. First one that I read was The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. This was actually a reread. I've read this a couple of years ago, but I remembered really enjoying it. This might be hard to talk and do my makeup. There's also a mirror behind you if you're wondering why I'm not looking at the camera. I'm looking just yonder the camera. Yond. Hunting Party is about a group of old college friends who are snowed in at a hunting cabin in the Scottish Highlands. It's very clear from the beginning that they've drifted apart and there's a lot of tension between the friends, and then one of them dies. And you're not sure who dies until sort of the middle end. You're trying to guess who the murderer is and then also who the victim is. It's kind of told from a few different perspectives, which I think is fun. I really like when books do this. I feel like it gives a much better understanding of the story. I like seeing like the inner thoughts of different characters. Takes place on New Year's Eve, so there's kind of like, ooh, it's cozy, it's holiday, it's death. I think I'd give this book like a 3.7, maybe a 3.8. Obviously this was a reread, so maybe I kind of knew what was gonna happen, even though it was a couple of years ago, so I had kind of forgotten, like, I remembered while I was reading it, but I forgot like who's the victim and like why they die. But I read a lot of mystery thriller type novels and I'm always trying to guess, and when you read so many of them you kind of get to a point where you can see tropes coming, you can kind of guess what's gonna happen before it happens. And I thought this was a good twist. Like I was pretty surprised on who the killer was. I kind of knew who the victim was gonna be, but the killer I was surprised about. I've read a few other of Lucy Foley's books. I think this one really resonated with me because I like the kind of atmospheric, I like a good setting in a thriller novel. I like to feel like it's cozy, but it's murder. And I feel like the Scottish Highlands are somewhere that I've always wanted to go, so it's just kind of fun to be like, ooh, mountains, ghost. They say this is a big rich town. Ah. Have you seen that 50 Cent show Power? Main character's name is Ghost, so we're basically the same. Second book I finished this month was The Antique Hunter's Guide to Murder by C.L. Miller. This one is about a middle-aged former antique hunter is investigating the death of her mentor, who she had a falling out with many years ago. And you don't really know why they had a falling out. You just know that she fucking hates his guts. With the help of her sassy older aunt, they figure out why he was murdered and who did it. I would give this book like 3 stars. I did enjoy it. I felt like it was just kind of like a fun, not like a super serious, spooky ooky type of mystery novel. It was more just like, oh, this is fun and sassy, sort of like comedic elements to it. But I think what sort of got on my nerves about this book was the dialogue between the characters seems very like a bit corny and fake, like no one would really speak that way or make those kinds of jokes in real life. So that was kind of my only qualm with it. It did take me, I finished it in February, but I actually started this last February and I kind of fell off of reading it for a little bit and then decided like, okay, enough is enough. It's time to get through this book. And I did like it. I felt like when you find out who the murderer is, it's a little like, oh, I had actually forgotten about that character. But I think that's probably my fault because I was not being consistent with reading it. So I did enjoy this book, but it wasn't like, definitely wasn't a fave for me. So 3 stars, still good, but not incredible. The next book I read was actually a poetry book, which is a little bit different for me. I don't often read poetry, but it was I Have More Souls Than One by Fernando Pessoa. He is a Portuguese poet and writer, I believe from the early 1900s. And I picked up this book in Portugal, actually, in the oldest bookstore in the world. And I've read another one of, I haven't finished it yet, but I'm reading another one of his books called The Book of Disquiet. And I really like him as a writer. I think he kind of has, I don't think it's supposed to be funny, but sort of a funny perspective on death. It's just really like, wow, love life, but don't forget you're gonna die. As someone who doesn't read a lot of poetry, it's because I feel like it's kind of hard to get into the like kind of stilted lines that they do in poetry. I can never really get into, but I really like him as a writer. I would give this, for a poetry book, I'd probably give this a 4. I did really enjoy this. I think he makes you think, and it's kind of like you're sitting there like, which I think is what poetry is supposed to do. Ooh. The next book I read was Watching You by Lisa Jewell, and I really enjoyed this one. I think this is my first 5-star book of the month. The story takes place in Melville Heights, a very nice neighborhood in Bristol, England, and it follows a few different perspectives of people living in the neighborhood. The kind of main character in this, her name is Joey, and she has just moved in with her brother and his wife in this nice neighborhood, and she's also just gotten married, and she develops this sort of obsession crush on her neighbor, who is a married headmaster at a local school. And then it follows the headmaster's son, who is sort of this recluse teenage boy who spends a lot of time in his room with binoculars just watching the neighbors. It also follows one of the students of the headmaster and her relationship with her mother, whose mental health has been deteriorating over the years. She believes that there's this secret gang out there that's watching her, and she becomes increasingly paranoid, and she believes that the headmaster is in charge of this, like he's the one out to get her. They're all sort of stalking each other, and it eventually ends in a murder. Okay, my camera died while I was filming that, so hopefully this is remotely a similar angle. Hi! Anyways, back to Watching You by Lisa Jewell. I felt like the ending to this was really satisfying. Like, I felt even though there is a murder, it was kind of a happy ending. Like, you get resolution on all the characters where you want them to be. I thought that the reveal of the murderer was also very satisfying. It really tied everything in together. I really like Lisa Jewell. I've read many of her books, and this was definitely, I would say, my favorite one from her. So I'm definitely gonna read more of her books, waiting for her to come out with even more, because at this point I've sort of run out of Lisa Jewell books to read. This was a 5 out of 5 for me, one of my favorites. And then the next book I read was Victorian Psycho by Virginia Feito. This is a new book. It just came out, and I would classify it as an extreme horror. It's very gory and just disturbing, but it also had kind of a darkly funny bit to it. Like, it was really well, let me just describe what the book is about. So it's basically about a governess who comes to this beautiful fancy house to take care of these 2 wealthy children. And it's set in Victorian era, as the title would suggest. and you can tell right away that there's something not right about this governess. She's very dark. She's not just bizarre, she's very like psychopathic. She's very just this creepy, weird character with very bizarre behavior. The story's told from her perspective, and it's clear that she has some sort of evil plan for this family that she is working for. And this book was wild. Just the way that it plays out was, while I was expecting it to be dark and psychotic, I wasn't expecting how it all went down, and there's sort of like a twist at the end that you're not expecting. I thought it was really well written. There was a lot of like visceral imagery. So this was definitely a 5 for me. I would say proceed with caution if you're not super into horror novels. This is not for you. This is not for the lighthearted. This is not an entry-level horror book. It's very disturbing, but it was really good. I liked the point of view and the sense of humor. 5 stars for Victorian Psycho. I think this is also a fairly new author, published author. On Goodreads, at least, it says that she only has 1 other published book, which I will definitely be checking out because I really enjoyed this one. The next book I read was Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. This one was also 5 stars for me. I feel like I was really on a roll with these 5-star books, just one after another. So this one is about a married couple who goes away for the weekend to try to save their crumbling marriage, but then bad things start to happen to them. It goes from the perspective of the wife and the husband and the housekeeper of the creepy old church that they're staying in. This also takes place in the Scottish Highlands. Really gotta go visit there, I guess. All my favorite books take place there. There's also letters that the wife has written to the husband every year on their anniversary for the past 10 years. So you get a perspective into like why their marriage crumbled. The twist in this was really not something that I was expecting. I feel like normally the twist is like who the murderer is in mystery novels, but that wasn't what the twist was in this story, and I wasn't expecting it. It was really perfect. It was unexpected, it was satisfying, it was just what you wanted it to be, and it was another one where it kind of ends in a way where you're happy with how it ended. Next book I read was On a Quiet Street by Seraphina Nova Glass. This one I would give like a 3.8 on 5 stars. This book follows a few women who live in a very rich, ritzy part of Portland, and it follows 3 different perspectives. The first one being Paige, whose son died a year ago in a hit and run, and she's become obsessed with trying to figure out who did this to her son, and she feels like it was not an accident. Somebody did this to him on purpose. And so you're following her grief and her obsession with her neighbors because they live in a gated community. So she knows it has to be someone that she knows. And she's like breaking into neighbors' houses and trying to get all this information on them. And the second perspective is from Cora, who is she comes across as like a ditzy housewife who believes that her husband is cheating on her, and she's obsessed with being kind of this perfect woman. And at first I really didn't like her character, but as the story progresses, I think you learn to like her a lot more. And she is best friends with Paige. And then the third perspective is from their other neighbor, Georgia, who had just moved there about a year ago from the UK to live with her husband, who's a high-powered judge. And Georgia is a bit of a recluse, and Cora becomes fascinated with her and just desperately wants to be her friend. Cora enlists Paige's help to try to seduce her husband to prove that he's cheating so that her prenup becomes invalid and she can have a life without him. And their three stories start to intersect. It really becomes sort of this like girl power novel where they're helping each other take down the evil men in their lives. I actually listened to this one as an audiobook, and I found it because it is narrated by Imogen Church, who I really enjoy listening to. I think she has a great voice for audiobooks. But there are other narrators as well, and the voice of Cora I found was pretty annoying. But you do get used to it after a while. I feel like it fits the character. This was a good book too. I did like this one. To get real close for this eyeliner. This is why the beauty girlies say, I'm just gonna pop off camera for a quick second. The last book that I read this month was His and Hers by Alice Feeney. After reading Rock, Paper, Scissors, I expected this book to be, I guess, something else than what it was. It was extremely graphic and disturbing. I would do a huge content warning if you're going to read this book. There's a lot of disturbing themes in it. But I would give this book like a 3.5. It is about a BBC News broadcaster who had been doing the lunchtime news for the past 2 years, replacing a woman on maternity leave. And then that woman comes back and she's fired and forced to go back to being on the road and covering news stories as they develop. And she goes back to her old hometown to cover a murder of a person that she used to know. And it follows her perspective and the head detective on the case. And you see how their stories interlock and it becomes a serial killer investigation. I liked this. I think it was a bit too, like, I don't mind when books are graphic. I just wasn't expecting it to be. I felt like when they finally reveal who the murderer is, it didn't make the most sense. Like, I felt like there were loose ends that weren't entirely wrapped up, in my opinion. I liked who the author chose to be the murderer, but I felt like there could have been more things tying it together to make it make sense to me. I did like this one. I just felt like it was not what I thought it was going to be after reading Rock, Paper, Scissors. I thought that the crime would be more nuanced and less, here's a graphic description of everything that has happened, which was fine. It wasn't what I was expecting it to be. So those were the 8 books I read in February this year. If you watched this all the way through, thank you for watching. Hopefully this isn't too boring. I guess we'll see in the edit.